At my husband's memorial, my only son leaned close and whispered, "Don't bother speaking. No one cares what you think." Then he handed the microphone to his wife, smiling as if I were invisible. I stayed silent. Weeks later, when he tried to claim my estate, the judge played his own voice plotting against me. His face went pale. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Margaret Hayes, and I never imagined that the people I loved most would one day become the ones who hurt me the deepest. I thought old age would mean afternoons with tea, books I finally had time to finish, the sound of birds in the backyard while sunlight drifted across the porch. I believed growing old meant wisdom, not erasure, but I was wrong. Until a few months ago, I still lived in the home my late husband Thomas and I built together in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. Every flower in the garden carried a memory. Every corner of that house still held the warmth of his presence. The scent of his morning coffee seemed to linger in the kitchen, stubbornly refusing to fade. I wasn't ready to leave. I didn't need to leave. It all began with something so small, a slip on a throw rug in the living room. I wasn't badly hurt, just a little bruised. I could still walk, still think, still be me. But that single fall became the weapon my son, Andrew, used against me. He arrived the next morning with a briefcase in hand and a face carved in stone. No trace of tenderness in his eyes. He didn't ask if I was all right. He didn't even sit down. He began speaking in clipped, rehearsed sentences, as if he were delivering a business pitch. "Mom, we found a really good facility," he said. "It's time. This is what's best for everyone." I laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't laughing. "Andrew," I said, steadying myself against the hallway wall, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm fine. This is my home." But it was already too late. My things were packed neatly into boxes I hadn't touched. The paperwork was signed, my name scrawled across forms I had never seen. Two strangers appeared in the doorway, ready to haul away my belongings as if I were nothing more than clutter to be cleared. I tried to protest, but the look in Andrew's eyes silenced me. It wasn't cruelty, it was worse than that. It was cold efficiency, the gaze of a man who saw his own mother as a liability to be managed. "You fell," he reminded me in a tone devoid of comfort. "You could have broken your hip. You live alone. It's too risky, and frankly, I don't have time to keep checking in on you." Not cruelty, just calculation. Somehow that hurt more. They didn't even let me ride in his car. I was loaded into a van, my chest heavy with silence so thick it pressed into my bones. I watched the only life I knew disappear through the rear window. My home, my garden, my freedom, all vanishing into distance. The facility they brought me to was clean, modern, painted in neutral tones that pretended to be comforting. The windows were large but cold. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something else I can only describe as abandonment. I was shown to a room, a bed made too neatly, a label with my name taped to the door like I was a misplaced package waiting to be stored. Andrew stood in the doorway, shifting impatiently. He didn't hold my hand. He didn't apologize. He didn't even ask if I was frightened. "I'll check in later this week," he said casually. "Don't worry, Mom. You'll be comfortable here." Then he left, just like that. I sat on the edge of that strange bed, surrounded by walls that didn't know me, staring at a suitcase that held the fragments of a life once full. My home, my true home, was now reduced to a memory. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of fluorescent lights spilling down the hallway. I thought of Thomas, of how we used to laugh about growing old together, of the vows we whispered to one another, to always care, always stay. But Thomas was gone, and Andrew had placed me here like a file tucked into a cabinet, out of sight, out of mind. For hours, I stared at the ceiling, numb and hollow. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the grief and betrayal, something stirred. Not rage, not despair, but something quieter and more enduring. It was defiance. They thought I was finished, a fragile woman to be tucked away and forgotten. But they had no idea what strength still lived inside me. That night, I began to plan. Quietly, carefully, I sketched the beginnings of a resolve that would carry me through the battles ahead. When the morning came, the sound of wheels squeaked across the hallway, Medication carts, footsteps of strangers, the muffled cough of someone I didn't yet know. The air carried the stale scent of overboiled coffee and scrambled eggs. I dressed myself slowly, savoring the small reminder that I still had control over my body, over something. As I stepped into the corridor, the staff nodded politely, their smiles polite but empty. To them, I wasn't Margaret Hayes, a woman who had lived, loved, built a family, and carried countless stories. To them, I was just another elderly patient, a fall risk, a bed number, a task to be completed. I walked to the common room, sat by a window where the sky hung low and gray. Outside, a squirrel darted across the fence, pausing to look at me through the glass. I envied it, the freedom to run where it pleased without needing permission, without forms or signatures. Andrew did not call that day. He did not call the next. As I sat in that chair, invisible in plain sight, I realized what I had become. I wasn't too old to remember. I wasn't too old to feel, but I was old enough to be forgotten. And yet, in that emptiness, the flame inside me only grew. Because if Andrew believed he had written the ending of my story, he had no idea just how wrong he was. The days inside the facility moved with the kind of rhythm that dulled the edges of memory. Mornings began with the rattle of carts in the hallway, the clatter of plastic trays stacked with food no one wanted to taste. Afternoons stretched long, filled with television reruns and voices that spoke in circles. The silence there wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, a reminder that time itself had been medicated into stillness. I tried to keep myself intact. Each morning I dressed carefully, refusing to surrender to the image of frailty. If all I had left was control over how I presented myself, then I would hold on to it like armor. But no amount of dignity could erase the truth. To the staff, I was a number on a chart. To the residents around me, I was another ghost in a chair by the window. Andrew came back on the fourth day. I hadn't seen him since the morning he brought me here, and for a fleeting second, my heart rose in foolish hope that maybe he'd realize what he had done. He appeared in the lounge, his shirt tucked neatly into pressed slacks, his expression impersonal, as if he'd just stepped out of a meeting. He carried a stack of insurance documents, placed them on the table between us, and slid a few photographs across the surface. "I thought you'd want these for your nightstand," he said. There were three, one of him as a boy in a Little League uniform, one of Thomas holding him as a baby, and one of me, cropped from the corner of a family vacation picture, almost as if I had been an afterthought. I looked at them in silence. "Is there anything you need?" he asked, his tone smooth, professional. It was the kind of voice people used when they wanted to sound kind, but hoped the answer would be no. What I wanted was to ask him why. Why he couldn't simply check in on me from time to time. Why he couldn't bear the inconvenience of caring. But I already knew his answer. This was easier. "You're quiet," he remarked. "I'm thinking," I replied. That unsettled him. His eyes flickered, restless, as though even a hint of resistance made him uncomfortable. Then he said words that carved into me like glass. "It's not like I don't care, Mom, but you've had your time. Now let me handle things." Had my time, as if life itself came with an expiration date, as if every book I still longed to read, every morning I still wanted to wake to sunlight, every breath still in my lungs meant nothing. He left after 10 minutes. No hug, no "I love you," no warmth at all. Just the click of his polished shoes fading down the hallway until they vanished into silence. The week that followed blurred together. Meals served on schedule, bingo games with meaningless prizes, and the same dull chatter filling the common room. I smiled at some of the residents, but most stared past me, lost inside themselves. Others didn't even remember their names. That was when I realized the cruelest part of this place wasn't the boredom. It was the erasure. They didn't just strip away your independence. They stripped away your identity. No one here knew that I once worked as a librarian, that I played piano for Thomas every Sunday morning, that I baked pies from scratch and read every Steinbeck novel twice. To them, I was simply another old woman waiting for time to finish its slow work. But then one afternoon, something shifted. A nurse I hadn't met before walked into the room with a clipboard tucked under her arm. Her scrubs were crisp, her dark hair pulled neatly back. But it wasn't her appearance that caught me. It was her eyes. They were tired, yes, but they carried a softness that spoke of someone who had carried far too much weight and still kept walking. "Mrs. Hayes?" she asked gently. "Hi, I'm Julia. I'll be checking in on you this week." I nodded, wary. Most staff addressed me with routine politeness, voices rehearsed like lines from a script. But Julia sat down in the chair beside me, her posture open, her presence quiet but steady. "Is there anything you want me to know about you?" she asked. The question startled me. No one had asked that since I arrived. For a long moment, I didn't know how to respond. Then the words came softly, almost against my will. "I like crossword puzzles. I can make a lemon meringue pie better than most bakeries. And I still remember the smell of my husband's shaving cream." Julia's lips curved into a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "That's good," she said. "I'd like to know more." It was such a simple exchange, yet something cracked open inside me. For the first time since I'd been forced into this place, I felt seen. Not as a patient, not as a burden, but as a person. The following days were different because of her. She came back each morning, even when she was busy. She remembered my favorite singer from the 70s. She brought me tea from the break room when the dining hall ran out. She laughed easily, though I sensed in her voice the heaviness of battles she carried silently. And in those moments, with her sitting across from me, I didn't feel like I was fading. I felt alive again, if only for a little while. I still missed my home. I still missed Thomas. I still felt the sting of Andrew's betrayal. But Julia's presence shifted something vital in me. It reminded me that I wasn't gone yet. I was watching, listening, learning who stood beside me and who never truly had. Because this wasn't just a nursing home. This was the stage for a battle I hadn't realized I was about to fight. And for the first time in weeks, I believed I might just win. What if the only person who truly saw you wasn't bound to you by blood, but by compassion? That thought haunted me in the nights when the hallways hummed with fluorescent silence and the weight of abandonment pressed against my chest. Blood had turned its back on me, but a stranger in scrubs had offered me something I didn't even know I was starving for. Recognition. Julia Carter became my anchor. Each morning her voice slipped into my room like sunlight through a narrow window. "Good morning, Margaret. You good today?" Simple words, yet they grounded me in a way nothing else had. She didn't see me as fragile or finished. She spoke to me as if I still mattered, as if there were chapters left in my story worth telling. Over time, her life unfolded in fragments during our conversations. She told me about Lily, her 6-year-old daughter, who adored peanut butter sandwiches and hated going to sleep. She described the way Lily demanded the hallway lights stay on at night, claiming it kept the nightmares away. Julia would smile softly when she told me these things, though sometimes her eyes betrayed a fatigue so deep it seemed carved into her bones. One evening in the small garden behind the facility, her voice faltered when she spoke of her mother. Early onset Alzheimer's, diagnosed when Julie was only 29. She had taken on 2 jobs, moved her mother into her apartment, and when her husband demanded she put her mother in a home, she refused. He walked out the door and never looked back. Her hands told the rest of the story. Calloused, nails trimmed short. The hands of someone who had done everything herself, carrying more than her share of weight without complaint. She spoke of it not to gain sympathy, but because it was her truth. And as she spoke, I realized how much of myself I saw reflected in her. The woman who sacrificed, who endured, who loved until her heart cracked. That night I lay awake thinking not of my own pain, but of hers. The parallel lines of our lives, different ages, different struggles, yet woven together by the same thread of loss and loyalty. For the first time in months, I felt the pulse of purpose again. The next morning, after breakfast, I asked her quietly if she could help me find my lawyer's number. She blinked, surprised, but didn't press. "Of course," she said gently. "I'll bring you a phone and a quiet place." I called Michael Turner, our old family attorney. He still remembered my voice. His tone shifted immediately when he heard the steel in mine. "Michael, I need to make changes to my will," I told him, "and I'd like to begin paperwork for an adult adoption." There was a long pause on the line. "Margaret, are you certain?" I looked through the small window at the garden where Julie and I had sat the night before. her laughter still ringing in my ears, her resilience etched into my mind. "I've never been more certain," I said. That afternoon, I wrote 2 letters. One was short, factual, almost cold, addressed to Andrew. The other I wrote with a trembling hand, addressed to Julia. That letter I sealed and tucked into the drawer of my nightstand, not yet ready to give it to her, but knowing the day would come when she would need to see the truth written in my own hand. I didn't tell her then. Instead, I listened to her talk about Lily's spelling homework, about the weather, about how she missed baking, but never had the time. And in those ordinary conversations, I felt my strength return, because the decision I had made was not born of anger. It was born of clarity. Andrew thought he had taken my future from me when he signed those papers and carried me into this place. But he had no idea what I was planning now. If he believed he could decide the ending of my story without my consent, he was about to learn how wrong he was. October arrived, and with it the sharp, rust-colored leaves that swirled across the courtyard like fading memories. Julia brought me real chamomile tea one afternoon, not the powdered kind. She said she thought of me when she found it at a discount store. I inhaled its fragrance, and for a moment, I was back in my old kitchen with Thomas reading the newspaper while cinnamon rolls baked in the oven. Julia smiled as she watched me. She had no idea that in that moment, she wasn't just my nurse. She was becoming my family. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that no longer felt like waiting for life to end. I wrote in a leather-bound journal, filling its pages with memories, regrets, and small victories. I told stories to Julia as if she were my daughter already, though the words remained unspoken between us. But beneath the surface of this fragile peace, I could feel it. The tension building, the storm gathering in silence. The betrayal of blood was not done with me yet, and when it finally arrived, I would be ready, because sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you're given, and sometimes love blooms not in bloodlines, but in the eyes of someone who refuses to let you disappear. Stay with me, because the path ahead is about to twist into shadows darker than I ever expected, and you'll want to hear every word of it. Like this story, share it, subscribe, and don't look away, because the next chapter will reveal just how far betrayal can reach. I began to live with 2 versions of myself, the woman the facility saw, quiet and compliant, and the woman I knew myself to be, awake and deliberate, planning each step like a chess match I refused to lose. Julia kept me tethered to hope. Each day she reminded me, without ever saying the words, that I still had value. She'd slip into my room with a cup of tea, ask about the books I once loved, or laugh at some memory I shared about Thomas. In her presence, I wasn't a forgotten widow or a patient on a chart. I was simply Margaret, and for that, I owed her more than she could ever know. It was during one of those evenings when the sky outside burned in streaks of orange and red that I sat at my desk and wrote 2 letters. The first was for Andrew. I kept it cold, sharp, the kind of note that carried no room for interpretation. I didn't beg or explain. I simply wrote that the choices he made had consequences, and that I was no longer blind to them. The second letter was harder. It was for Julia. I poured pieces of my heart into it, words I could never bring myself to say aloud. I told her that she was no longer just a nurse in my eyes, but something more. Proof that family could be chosen. Proof that loyalty still existed in a world that had turned its back on me. I sealed it carefully and slid it into the drawer of my nightstand, where it waited for the right time. The changes to my will were finalized quickly. Michael Turner, my lawyer, confirmed everything in his steady, reassuring voice. Half my estate, my home, savings, and investments, was now legally promised to Julia Carter. No announcement, no ceremony. Just the quiet reshaping of my legacy, the first decision in years that felt entirely mine. I didn't tell Julia right away. Instead, I let life unfold with its small, tender moments. We sat together in the garden, watching leaves drift to the ground. We spoke about Lily's birthday, about the kind of cake she loved, about the way children could find joy even in the simplest things. I listened to her voice, warm yet tired, and felt an ache of recognition. She was carrying the kind of weight I once carried for Andrew, but with more grace than he had ever shown me. The contrast between them sharpened every day. Julia's loyalty burned steady, while Andrew's neglect hollowed out whatever remained of the bond between us. He hadn't called in weeks. When he did appear, his visits were short, his eyes distracted, his words rehearsed. He spoke to me as if I were already gone. Each time he left, I felt the air grow colder. But I was not gone. Not yet. The journal I had begun became my companion. I filled it with pieces of myself, like planting seeds in soil that still had life left in it. Stories about my years with Thomas, recipes I once baked, lines of poetry I had memorized in college. I even wrote letters to myself, reminders that I was still here, that my mind was sharp, that my story wasn't over. Julia noticed the change in me. "You look brighter these days," she said once, tilting her head with a small smile. I only nodded. I couldn't tell her the truth, that she was the reason I hadn't collapsed under the weight of betrayal, that she had unknowingly pulled me back from the edge of despair. October deepened. The air turned cool, the trees outside painted in shades of copper and crimson. One afternoon, Julia handed me a cup of chamomile tea she had bought with her own money. The fragrance filled the room with warmth, carrying me back to mornings in my kitchen, Thomas reading the newspaper as cinnamon rolls baked in the oven. For the first time in a long while, I let myself close my eyes and feel the comfort of memory without pain. But even as I cherished those moments, I couldn't shake the sense of a storm building just beyond the horizon. The facility grew quieter around me, but my mind was louder than ever. I had rewritten my legacy, I had chosen my family, and for the first time since Thomas's death, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Still, unease lingered. A shadow stretched between me and the peace I was trying to claim. Andrew's absence was not freedom, it was preparation. Somewhere deep inside, I knew he hadn't finished with me yet. He was waiting, calculating, planning his next move. But I was no longer the woman he thought he could manipulate. I had Julia by my side. I had a lawyer who believed in me. And most importantly, I had rediscovered the strength to fight. That night, as I placed the sealed letter for Julia deeper into the drawer, I whispered into the silence of my room, "You won't erase me, Andrew. Not this time." The walls did not answer, but I felt the truth settle in my chest like a vow. The next battle was coming. I could feel it, and I would be ready. What if the person you raised, the child you once held in your arms through sleepless nights, became the very force plotting your downfall? That was the question that echoed in my chest the night I realized Andrew was no longer my son in spirit, but an enemy cloaked in the disguise of family. It was well past midnight when I woke to hushed voices drifting down the hallway. Most nights, the facility fell into dead silence after 9 o'clock. Lights dimmed, doors closed, residents tucked away like forgotten books on a dusty shelf. But this night was different. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and opened my door just enough to peer out. At the far end of the hall, near the administrator's office, stood Andrew. My breath caught in my throat. He hadn't visited in weeks, and yet there he was, his face sharp with agitation as he gestured to a man in a gray suit I didn't recognize. Their voices were low, but one sentence floated toward me like poison carried on the air. "If she changes that will, I lose everything." I froze. The lawyer, because that's who the man must have been, sighed heavily. "It's her legal right, Andrew. You can't stop her from doing it." Andrew's reply was a blade. "She's not thinking clearly. She's alone, confused, probably being manipulated by some staff member." My blood ran cold. He meant Julia. "I want a psychological evaluation," Andrew pressed. "Something official. If she's declared incompetent, the will can't be changed." I stumbled back into the shadows, my heart pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. "I'm not going to let her hand my inheritance to some nurse," he hissed. "She owes me." Owes him, as though my entire life, every sacrifice, every memory, every dollar Thomas and I built together, belonged to him by default. So, as though I was nothing more than a vessel for his entitlement. The lawyer hesitated, his voice wary. "Are you sure you want to go down this road?" Andrew didn't pause. "Do it." I slipped back into my room, closed the door quietly, and sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. I wasn't sure what hurt more, what I had overheard, or the fact that deep down, I wasn't surprised. Andrew had always been calculating, always looking for angles. But that night, the mask fell away. I saw the truth for what it was. He didn't care about my well-being. He cared about control. And that's when another truth slammed into me with devastating clarity. I thought about the night Thomas died. It had been sudden. He collapsed in his office while sorting through financial records. I wasn't home. I had been visiting a friend. By the time I returned, he was already gone. The doctors called it a heart attack. No one had been there to help. But now, with Andrew's words still ringing in my ears, memories rushed back like broken glass. The phone call Thomas made that evening, the call Andrew claimed he never received. The way Andrew arrived at the hospital late, his eyes dry, his expression detached. The silence that followed every time I tried to ask questions. Had he? I didn't want to finish the thought, but I already knew the answer. Andrew hadn't ignored his father's call because he couldn't help. He ignored it because he wouldn't. Because letting Thomas die meant he wouldn't have to face the financial fallout of the company's debts. Debts Andrew himself had helped create. And now he was coming for me too. But I wasn't Thomas. I wasn't going to be erased quietly. The next morning I acted as though nothing had happened. Andrew didn't know I had overheard him. He even brought me a box of herbal teas, his smile thin and false. "Thought you'd like these," he said, as though small gestures could mask the rot of his intentions. I nodded, playing along. Inside, I was already sharpening my resolve. Later that day, I sought out one of the newer aides, a timid young woman named Emily. She hesitated when I asked about the night shifts, but finally whispered, "It was Sophie at the front desk that night." I found Sophie folding laundry in the back hallway. My voice was low, steady. "You saw my son here, didn't you?" Her eyes darted nervously before she nodded. "Yes, he was in the office for a long time arguing." "Did you hear anything?" She swallowed hard. "Just something about paperwork, about declaring someone unfit." Her confirmation was a weight settling on my shoulders. I thanked her and walked away, my mind ablaze with certainty. Back in my room, I stared at the photograph Andrew had left weeks earlier, the one of him as a boy in his Little League uniform. The child I had held through thunderstorms, the teenager I forgave when he lied about grades, the man I defended even when Thomas warned me he was growing selfish, cold. I had loved him unconditionally. But love, I realized, had always been a one-way street. I reached into my drawer and pulled out the sealed envelope, the letter I had written to Julia. My hands trembled as I held it, but there was no fear left in me, only resolve. Because if Andrew had declared war, then I would not go quietly into his shadows. The time had come to deliver that letter. Stay close. The storm is rising now, and when it breaks, you'll want to hear every secret it exposes. Like this story, share it, subscribe, and don't look away. The fight for my name, my dignity, and my truth has only just begun. The summons came quietly, delivered by a nurse I didn't recognize. Her voice was flat, mechanical, like she was reading a menu. "Mrs. Hayes, the attending physician has recommended a transfer for observation. Just a few days for your safety." "Safety from what?" I asked. She blinked, her expression unreadable. "There have been concerns, confusion, unusual conversations, possible signs of delusion." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "You mean realizing my son is a vulture?" She didn't respond. Within minutes, 2 orderlies arrived with a wheelchair. I told them I didn't need it. They said it was protocol. I didn't resist. I knew that resistance would only fuel their narrative. If I raised my voice, they'd call it hysteria. If I refused to cooperate, they'd write combative in my chart. So I sat quietly while they wheeled me through a door I had never noticed before, a door sealed with a keypad lock. The moment it clicked shut behind me, a crack opened inside my chest. The air grew heavier, sterile, oppressive. The walls were painted a muted green that felt more like prison than hospital. My new room was smaller, stripped bare. The bed was bolted to the floor, the window reinforced with safety glass. No sharp objects, no phone, no Julia. I asked the nurse with the tight bun how long I'd be kept there. She hesitated before answering. "Until the evaluation is complete." "And who ordered it?" Her silence was long enough to confirm what I already knew. Finally, she said, "Your son made the request," with a supporting statement from Dr. Levin. Dr. Howard Levin, the facility's medical director, a man I'd spoken to only a handful of times, never once confiding in. I sat on the edge of the bed, fire rising in my chest. This was Andrew's next move. He couldn't undo my will on his own, but if I were declared incompetent, every decision I'd made, every word in those documents, would be void, and I would be silenced, literally locked away. That first night was endless. I didn't sleep. The lights outside my door stayed on, spilling a pale glow through the crack at the bottom. A nurse came in with pills, her smile falsely sweet. "These will help you rest." I refused them. "You seem agitated," she said. "I'm not agitated," I answered coldly. "I'm aware." When she left, I thought of Thomas, of how he must have felt in his office that night, clutching his chest, dialing the number of the one person he thought would come. I thought of Andrew, looking at the phone and choosing not to answer. Tears burned my eyes, not from fear, but from the brutal truth. I was no longer his mother. I was an obstacle. The next morning, a young social worker entered. His badge read Ryan Mitchell. He carried a clipboard and tried to soften his voice. "I'm here to ask you some questions, Mrs. Hayes, just routine." "Don't waste your breath," I said. "You're not here for me. You're here to validate paperwork." "That's not true," he protested. "Then let me make a phone call." His eyes dropped. "That's not permitted without physician approval." So much for rights. He left 15 minutes later, unsettled. I hadn't given him what they expected. No rants, no breakdowns, no confusion. Only clarity, calm, cold, undeniable. They wanted to paint me as unstable. Instead, I gave them composure. That evening, as I pretended to nap, I heard two nurses whispering outside my door. "She's lucid," one said softly. Honestly, more coherent than half the staff. "Orders are orders," the other replied. Hope flickered inside me. Not everyone was blind. Still, I was trapped. The walls pressed closer with each passing hour, but I reminded myself I was not alone. Somewhere beyond those locked doors, Julia was still fighting for me. I could feel it, even if I couldn't see her. And I was right. The first time Julia tried to visit, they turned her away. Later, she told me how her hands shook with fury as she stood at the front desk demanding answers. They gave her none. "Mrs. Hayes is no longer under your care," they said blandly. "The matter is being handled internally." But Julia wasn't the kind to walk away. She called Michael Turner, the lawyer I had trusted, and she sent him the sealed letter I had written weeks earlier. The one waiting like a planted seed, ready to grow when the storm broke. That letter changed everything. Michael met Julia in his office the next morning. She told him everything, about Andrew's pressure, about my sudden transfer, about the lies written into my chart, and she gave him something more. A recording. 2 weeks earlier, during a casual conversation in the hallway, Andrew had spoken near the nurse's station. Unaware, Julia's phone was recording from her coat pocket. His voice was unmistakable, clear, venomous. "She's just lonely, easy to manipulate. That nurse is conning her. Once I have her declared unfit, the will goes back to the way it should be." That single recording was enough to raise alarms. But Julia didn't stop there. She tracked down Sophie, the night shift nurse, who reluctantly admitted she had seen Andrew at the facility after hours. With Julia's urging, Sophie agreed to sign a statement. Then came the medical files. Julia noticed inconsistencies, dates that didn't align, notes attributed to me that I never said, fabricated claims of noncompliance. She gathered it all: statements, records, proof of manipulation. Together, she and Michael filed for an emergency hearing. They called it what it was: elder abuse. Meanwhile, I paced the length of my locked room like a caged animal. Every day, they tried to medicate me. Every day, I refused. My chart grew heavier with labels like uncooperative and defensive. But I knew the truth. They didn't want me calm. They wanted me numb. They wanted me erased. But I wasn't erased yet. Somewhere beyond those walls, Julia was carrying my fight. And I believed in her because she was the only one who had ever looked at me and seen not a patient, not a burden, not a bank account, but a human being. And when the notice finally came that I had a hearing scheduled before a judge, I knew she had found the way through. They thought they could silence me. They thought locking me away behind the sterile walls would erase my voice. but they forgot the truth. Silence is not the same as surrender. My story wasn't finished, and when the time came to stand before a judge, I would make sure the world heard every word. The morning of the hearing, they tried to dress me up like a doll. Clean clothes, brushed hair, a nurse offering coffee I didn't trust. They wanted me to look presentable but fragile, like an old woman drifting toward confusion. I refused to play their part. I stood tall, my spine straight, my eyes clear. I wasn't walking into that courtroom as a victim. I was walking in as someone with nothing left to lose. The van that carried me had tinted windows, as though I were a criminal being transported in secret. The orderlies in the front talked casually about their lunch plans while I sat in the back, hands folded neatly, memorizing every careless word. The old lady with the nurse problem, one of them joked. They thought I couldn't hear. They thought I didn't matter. Soon their words would matter more than they knew. The courthouse was small, gray, unremarkable. They ushered me through a side entrance, away from public view, as if I were something shameful. But when I entered the courtroom, my eyes landed on her. Julia. She sat near the front, her navy blouse pressed, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The moment she saw me, her eyes softened with tears she didn't shed. She only nodded, silently promising, "I told you I'd come." And then I saw Andrew. He was polished, smug, sitting beside his lawyer with the posture of a man who believed the outcome was already his. He didn't look at me, but he didn't need to. His arrogance filled the air like smoke. The judge entered, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that scanned the room with practiced disinterest. She hadn't decided anything yet. That gave me hope. Michael Turner rose first. His voice was calm, steady, deliberate. He laid out the evidence piece by piece like surgical cuts. Julia's recording, Sophie's statement about Andrew's secret visits, the fabricated medical records. And then he pressed play. Andrew's voice filled the room, undeniable, venomous. "She's just lonely, easy to manipulate. That nurse is conning her. Once I have her declared unfit, the will goes back to the way it should be." The words hung in the air like a stench. The courtroom fell silent. Even Andrew's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. It was too late to take it back. When it was my turn, I rose slowly. My knees shook, but my voice did not. "I may be old," I said, my gaze fixed firmly on the judge. "But I am not confused. I am not senile. And I am not finished." I turned to Andrew then, the boy I had once loved without limits, the man who had turned into something unrecognizable. "I trusted you. I forgave you for so many things. But when you let your father die, when you ignored his call for help so you wouldn't be held responsible for your own mistakes, you crossed a line I can never forgive." Gasps rippled across the room. Andrew's face drained of color. "This isn't about money," I continued, my voice strong and unwavering. "It's about dignity. It's about being seen, being heard, being human. If my life means nothing more to my son than a dollar sign, then I will spend what's left of it with someone who treats me like I matter." Julia's eyes brimmed with tears. She reached for a tissue quietly, her shoulders trembling with emotion. The judge called for a recess. When we returned, her voice was firm, resolute. "Mrs. Hayes is of sound mind and full legal capacity. This court finds the petition for guardianship filed by Mr. Andrew Hayes to be baseless and deeply concerning." She turned toward Andrew, her eyes sharp as steel. "You should consider yourself fortunate. Your mother does not press criminal charges." Just like that, I was free. Free from the locked ward, free from the threat of silence, free from the son who had mistaken entitlement for love. Outside the courthouse, Julia wrapped her arms around me. Not tightly, not desperately, just right. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "We did." But I knew the fight wasn't truly over. The law had cleared my name, but Andrew's shadow lingered. His hunger for control hadn't been satisfied. The war wasn't finished. It was only beginning. Stay with me, because the battles ahead will cut deeper, and the truths waiting to be uncovered will shake everything. Like this story, share it, subscribe, because what comes next is not just survival, it's a reckoning. The morning after the hearing, I returned to my room, the same beige walls, the same narrow window, the same photo of Thomas tucked into the corner of the vanity. Yet everything felt different. I was different. They had tried to break me, to erase me, to strip away my voice. But I was still standing, sharper than ever. When Julia appeared with a breakfast tray, the smell of pancakes and fresh strawberries filled the air. She set it down with a small grin. "Victory pancakes," she said. I chuckled softly. "We earned them." That day, I noticed the staff shifting around me. Some avoided my eyes, ashamed of the roles they had played. Others muttered nervous apologies, as if a few words could erase weeks of complicity. I didn't hold grudges, but I remembered. I remembered everything. Andrew vanished in the days that followed. No phone calls, no visits, no attempts at explanation. It was as if he had melted into the shadows, waiting for the storm to pass. But I knew him too well. Silence wasn't surrender. Silence was strategy. I refused to live in fear of his next move. Instead, I took a step that cemented the choice I'd already made in my heart. Michael Turner finalized the adoption paperwork. Julia Carter became my daughter, not just in spirit, but in law. When the judge asked if I was certain, I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "because family isn't made of blood. Family is made of loyalty, of love, of who stays when everything falls apart." Julia's eyes filled with tears when I told her. She pressed her hand over mine and whispered, "Are you sure?" I squeezed her fingers gently. I've never been more sure of anything. Word reached Andrew soon after. His response came in a single line, delivered cold through email. "You'll regret this. I deleted it." His anger wasn't about money, not really. His anger was that I had given Julia something he believed belonged to him by default. My love. In the weeks that followed, life felt lighter. Julia and I planned Lily's birthday, an afternoon party with balloons and cupcakes in the small courtyard behind the facility. Lily wore a paper crown, laughing as she ran between chairs, her joy infectious. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe without dread pressing against my lungs. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found an old scarf Thomas had given me. I held it to my cheek, closing my eyes. His voice echoed in memory, steady, kind, full of quiet strength. "I hope I've made you proud," I whispered to the silence. But peace is a fragile thing. It didn't last. Michael called one morning, his voice grave. "Andrew is contesting the will again. This time he's claiming undue influence. He's hired a new team." I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. Of course he had. A snake doesn't change, it only sheds its skin. But this time I wasn't afraid. We had recordings, witness statements, medical proof of my clarity, legal guardianship of my estate, and now the adoption. His web of control unraveled more with each attempt. Still, the knowledge that my own son was prepared to drag me through the courts again cut deep. I would always remember the little boy he once was, the child who clutched my hand during thunderstorms, the boy whose laughter once filled my home. Loving that memory didn't change the truth. The man he had become was a stranger. That evening, I sat with Julia in the garden. The sunset stretched long golden lines across the grass, while Lily chased fireflies, her giggles carrying like music. "I wish I could say I don't care," I murmured, my eyes fixed on the horizon. "But I do. I still care." Julia didn't answer right away. She reached for my hand, warm and steady. "You don't have to stop caring," she said gently. "You just have to stop letting him hurt you." Her words sank into me like a balm. She was right. I would always love the boy Andrew once was, but I would no longer mourn the man he had chosen to become. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something important. The war wasn't just about money or documents. It was about legacy, about dignity, about refusing to let betrayal write the final chapter of my life. The next battle was coming, and when it did, I would be ready. Not alone this time, not silenced, but standing side by side with the family I had chosen. And if Andrew believed he could erase me with lies and greed, he was about to learn that I had built something he could never touch. The final battle arrived not with a crash, but with a summons. Another court date. Another chance for Andrew to twist the truth into something unrecognizable. This time, he claimed I had been manipulated, that Julia had preyed on my loneliness, that I had rewritten my will under undue influence. I expected the anger. I didn't expect the exhaustion. Each attempt he made to erase my choices weighed heavier than the last, not because I feared him winning, but because I still couldn't stop seeing the boy he once was, the child who once reached for my hand in the dark. That boy was gone, and I had to face the man he had become. The courtroom was crowded this time. Word had spread about the previous hearing, about the recording that revealed Andrew's greed. Reporters lined the benches, their pens scratching eagerly. I walked in with Julia beside me, her hand steady on my arm. She wasn't just my nurse anymore. She was my daughter, and the strength in her grip reminded me I was not walking into this fight alone. Andrew's lawyer stood first. His arguments were rehearsed, dripping with false concern. He spoke of my age, of the supposed vulnerability of a grieving widow, of how a kind but opportunistic caregiver had inserted herself into my affairs. His words slithered through the room like smoke, meant to cloud judgment, meant to cast doubt. But then Michael Turner rose, and the fog lifted. Calm, deliberate, unflinching, he presented the truth. He read aloud passages from my journal, entries written in my own hand, dated, clear, articulate. He submitted medical reports from independent physicians confirming my mental clarity. He played again the recording of Andrew's own voice, dripping with contempt. She's just lonely, easy to manipulate. And then he called Julia to the stand. She walked forward slowly, her blouse simple, her hair pulled back, no artifice, no performance. She spoke softly but firmly, describing not her sacrifices, not her struggles, but me. She told the court about our talks in the garden, about the journal I kept, about the stories I shared of Thomas and the life we built. She didn't need me to tell her what to do, Julia said, her voice trembling with quiet conviction. She knew exactly what she wanted. She chose me, not because I asked, not because I hinted, but because she saw me treating, and because she was tired of being unseen by her own blood. The room fell silent. Finally, the judge turned to me. Mrs. Hayes, do you wish to speak? I rose slowly, my hands gripping the rail for balance. My voice was steady when I answered. Yes, Your Honor, I wish to speak. I looked directly at Andrew, and for the first time in years, I felt no fear, only clarity. My son believes he has the right to control me because he carries my blood. But blood alone does not make family. Family is made of loyalty, of compassion, of love freely given. I gave him all of that, and in return, he gave me betrayal. He abandoned me when I needed him most, and now he wants to erase the choices I made with the little time I have left. But I will not let him. My life is mine. My voice is mine. My legacy is mine. I turned back to the judge. And I choose Julia Carter as my daughter, not by accident of birth, but by the strength of her heart. The decision didn't take long. The judge ruled in my favor, dismissing Andrew's claims as baseless and malicious. She declared my will valid, my adoption legal, my rights intact. Then she delivered a final warning to Andrew, her tone sharp with authority. If you continue this harassment, you may face charges that extend far beyond civil court. It was over. Andrew stormed out without a glance back. I didn't follow him with my eyes. For once, I let him walk away without carrying the weight of his choices on my shoulders. Outside, the air smelled like rain. Julia stood beside me, her arm linked with mine. Lily darted ahead, chasing a stray balloon caught in the breeze. For the first time in years, I felt the future stretch before me. Not long, perhaps, but mine. Entirely mine. I had fought not just for money, not just for a name on paper, but for dignity, for the right to decide how my story would end. And I had won. That night, as I wrote in my journal, I penned my final words for the day. Legacy is not about what you leave behind. It's about who you leave it with. And I knew then that my story had found its true ending, not in betrayal, but in love chosen freely, fiercely, and forever. If you've stayed with me through this journey, remember this. Betrayal may wound, but it cannot erase you unless you surrender. Choose love where it lives. Build family where you find loyalty, and never let anyone else decide your worth. Share this story, let others hear it, and keep listening. For every voice silenced by greed, there are countless others waiting to rise.